Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I think, though, that there's a little bit of basketball that's worth discussing. Again, for people who are new to this channel, we will be kind of transitioning into a lot more football talk over the next couple months. I'll say this, though, before you know it, we're going to have to start talking basketball again, because by October, we're going to start to get stories and narratives, blah, 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 whatever. I bring it up because while college basketball, the news element of it is a little bit quieter, it is kind of worth noting that this is a sort of busy time on the recruiting calendar, okay? And it's a very busy time on the recruiting calendar. Over the last probably 5-6 days, coaches have been on the road recruiting. And oh, by the way, this coming weekend, they're on the road as well. The Adidas tournament is actually in LA. I'm going to try to get there either Friday or Saturday because there's a lot of good players. And so what we do generally in the fall, while it's obviously a busy time in football, we do a lot of college basketball recruiting, kind of talking about visits, this, that, the other thing. And so what I thought we would do today is kind of just go through the big names in high school basketball, the big recruitments, and who is kind of trending for who. It's a little bit early, but it is still worth discussing. So let's get into just what we learned this weekend in high school basketball recruiting, what it means, the big names that you need to know. The first big name, listen, we talked a lot about Tyran Stokes on the last episode. If you listened, we had that mailbag episode of Tyron Stokes. And I mentioned, originally from the city of Louisville, a player that is the number one high school player in America. He now plays high school ball in California. Well, I bring it up because if you remember, I listed 4 schools that I believed were probably the favorites to land him. I said, I think it's going to be one of these 4. And I think even of the 4, I think essentially 1 or 2 of them probably are on the outside looking in. Okay. Well, I bring it up because what were the 4 schools that I said? I said Louisville. I said Kentucky. I said Kansas. And I think Arkansas is maybe a little bit of a dark horse given John Calipari's ties to the state of Kentucky. Well, I bring it up because he played for the Oakland Soldiers this weekend in the EYBL event. Who are the 4 coaches that were there? Producer Matt, do you have the Jeff Borzello tweet? Jeff Borzello, ESPN, tweets, Pat Kelsey, Bill Self, Mark Pope, and John Calipari, each with an assistant, were in attendance for the number 1 recruit in America, Tyran Stokes. Mentioned that he also plays with Jason Crow, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, kind of nailed it on Friday. Said, I think these are the 4 schools. I think this is who it's going to end up being. Well, Pat Kelsey, Bill Self, John Calipari, and Mark Pope were all there courtside with an assistant. Listen, we don't have to dive too much into this. If you missed the segment last week, you should go back and check it out. We talked a lot about Tyran Stokes. I think it's going to be one of those 4. Already taken visits to Louisville, Kansas, and Kentucky. And I don't know what his time frame is, but I think it's probably going to be one of those 3, maybe Arkansas in the mix. I think it's too early to say there's a definitive favorite. If I had to guess, I would lean Louisville, but I don't think it's I wouldn't be ready to put in a crystal ball. If I was one of those guys that did crystal balls, I don't know that I would put them in that mix right now as a definitive favorite. But those are the 4. I think those are going to be the 4. I know some UNC fans kind of said, well, what about us? I'm not saying it can't be Carolina. I'm just saying that I would guess it's going to be one of those 4. I would give Louisville a slight edge, but not by much. Let's keep it going. Very interesting player that made a very interesting announcement on a visit schedule. That's the guy you can see on the screen right there. Taylen Kinney, 5-star, number 1 point guard in America. He plays at Overtime Elite, but it is worth acknowledging, where is he originally from? He's from the beautiful state of Kentucky, okay? And so I bring it up because this is one of the most coveted guards in all of high school basketball. He is going to be 5-star McDonald's All-American, and he, like Tyran Stokes, has already taken some visits. Already visited Louisville, already visited Purdue, already visited Kentucky, and coming into the weekend, had plans to visit Indiana, Oregon, and Texas. Well, I bring it up because coming out of the weekend, he did add a very significant visit to his itinerary. I want to give credit to Sam Lance of Zag's blog because he had this before. And listen, it's going to sound like a criticism or a cheap shot. It isn't. Joe Tipton's great at what he does. Travis Branham, great at what they do. They both put out the visit news on Monday, but want to give credit to Sam Lance, who had this on Saturday, because Sam Lance was the first one to report that Taylen Kinney will visit Arkansas on September 26th. Now, that's a noteworthy visit because Arkansas actually plays Notre Dame football at home that weekend. Now, I guess in theory, if things are going really bad for Arkansas, it could be a lousy crowd. But I think John Calipari's thinking that's going to be a rocket environment. I think even if Arkansas isn't good in football, I think the fans are going to show up to watch Notre Dame. Like, how often does Notre Dame come to your home stadium? So I only bring it up because I think that is a noteworthy visit. And I'll say this too, is that I do think that what's interesting to me about Taylen Kinney is some of his comments that he has made about John Calipari in the past feel noteworthy to me. Remember, he's from Kentucky, and so he grew up on Calipari's Wildcats, and when he's been asked about John Calipari, he has been basically like, look, the track record speaks for itself. The pros that he has developed speak for themselves, and so, I think there's this insinuation Calipari's trying to get in late. He's a 5-star. He's going to be a Louisville or Kentucky commit. And like Tyron Stokes, like if I had to bet on it right now, I would probably bet it would probably be one of those two, probably with Louisville actually as the slight edge. Taylen Kinney's an Adidas kid, Louisville's an Adidas school, whatever. But I think it's pretty clear that NBA track record with John Calipari, I think is going to carry some degree of weight in this recruitment. And what's also worth noting with Arkansas, they could lose their entire backcourt. Is DJ Wagner going to come back for a fourth year in 2026, 2027? Maybe, but who knows? Especially with rev share. I mean, might not be able to make as much money as a senior as he is than as he is as a junior. Darius Acuff, we assume, is going to be a one and done. What about Malik Thomas? And so I only bring it up because there could be a spot for Taylen Kinney to get the ball in his hands at Arkansas. He's visiting October 26th. I don't think we should dismiss this as just, John Calipari's trying to get into the last minute. I would think they have a legitimate shot. Very quickly, staying on John Calipari in Arkansas, I thought this was interesting. John Calipari very active in following and pursuing Jordan Smith, top 5 prospect, guard, number 2 player in the class, according to 24/7 Sports. Jordan Smith Jr. was part of that Team USA gold medal team. I thought, I mentioned this with Tyran Stokes last week. I really liked how Tyron Stokes took on a role with that team. Tyron Stokes was used to being the best player everywhere he's played, but now he's on a team with Koa Pete, with AJ DeBonsa, with Mikel Brown Jr. And I only bring it up because I thought Jordan Smith Jr. did the same of just 2 guys along with Tyron Stokes that are really good, that prove that they can play a role when they're around other talented people. Well, I bring it up because this is a player that John Calipari is very clearly prioritizing. I think right now I would probably say Duke is the favorite, and Duke, I think that's one where I would guess it's going to be a Duke-Arkansas thing. Again, maybe other schools are going to get involved. I'm not saying that they won't, but thought it was noteworthy. John Calipari, that seemed to be one of his priority follows and priority visits was Jordan Smith this weekend, so I think that's worth noting. So I mentioned Duke. There is one other Duke recruit that I think is very much worth noting. One of the more intriguing prospects, in my opinion, in this 2026 class, Cameron Williams from Arizona, plays for the Compton Magic. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of inside college basketball right now. Compton Magic are arguably the best AAU program in the country. I live on the West Coast. I've been lucky enough to get to know some of the people there. They do as good of a job as identifying and developing players as any AAU program in the country. That's no disrespect. They're just unbelievable. Some of the guys that have played for the Compton Magic: Evan Mobley, Defensive Player of the Year. I remember talking to Atope from the Compton Magic when he was in high school, Evan Mobley. And Atope was like, Evan Mobley's going to be the best big man from the West Coast since Tyson Chandler. Kind of delivered on that promise. Dalen Terry, who's in the NBA now with the Bulls, played for the Compton Magic. Johnny Juzang, who's in the NBA, UCLA and Kentucky, played for the Compton Magic. Koa Pete, now at Arizona, Compton Magic. Elijah Arenas, now at USC, Compton Magic. They have so many good players, and they have 2 really good ones on their 17U team this year One is Bruce Branch, who's arguably the best player in 2027. The other one is Cameron Williams, 2026. What's interesting about Cameron Williams, first of all, growth spurt. He's now like 6'9", 6'10", but he plays like a wing. Two, the other thing that's interesting about him, not all the recruiting services have caught up on him. Now, 24/7 has him listed as a 5-star, fringe top 10 prospect. Some places still have him as a 4-star. I think he is going to end up being a top 5 player in this class, maybe a top 3 player in this class when it's all said and done. Just gets better year over year, month over month, in AAU, session over session. So like the player that he is now compared to what he even was in April and May is a different dude. Well, I bring it up because, listen, when you're the head coach at Duke, people are going to notice where you are. And I thought it was noteworthy that Jon Scheyer spent a bunch of his time following around, you know what I mean, but Cameron Williams. And this is not a top 3, top 4 prospect currently in the class. And so the fact that Jon Scheyer is prioritizing him means that Jon Scheyer don't care what the recruiting rankings say. Jon Scheyer thinks that's one of the best players in this class, and he is going to prioritize him. So it'll be really interesting. I mentioned this off the top. The AAU circuit comes to LA this weekend. I'm going to try to get there either Friday or Saturday for the Adidas. And, the Adidas has Taylen Kinney. It has Cameron Williams. And I'll be curious. I expect to see Mark Pope, John Calipari, Jon Scheyer out at Adidas this weekend. It'll be really interesting because Adidas is in LA. Peach Jam is in Augusta. And there's going to be a lot of flying back and forth. Should mention with Cameron Williams, too, very early in his recruitment. I don't, just because Duke is, there, I'm not sitting there saying like, it's a done deal by any stretch. He set up a bunch of other visits. Texas, remember, Sean Miller's at Texas now. Sean Miller is a heck of a recruiter. On top of that, he will visit Purdue and USC. I'll add this, too. I mentioned it the other day. I was at Eric Musselman's practice a few days ago at USC. Eric Musselman ain't taking a backseat to nobody in recruiting. I think just like Kentucky, they were in the mix with Jason Crow Jr. until this weird stuff with, Jason Crow Jr. going to Missouri. We'll talk about that when he ends up committing, but I think that's certainly worth noting. Haven't mentioned much with Kentucky. Do want to give Mark Pope some credit, though, because I think they're quietly making a move on what I believe to be one of the top players in the 2026 class, Caleb Holt. Okay, so Caleb Holt, another player that was part of that Team USA that just won a gold medal over there in Switzerland. Very good player. He's originally from Georgia, I believe. Now, he's going to Prolific Prep next year, but I want to say he's from Georgia. Yeah, he's from Loganville, Georgia. Okay, so I bring it up because a couple weeks ago, the only real recruiting news that we had was that he had set visits to Alabama and Auburn. Listen, Bruce Pearl, what he's doing speaks for itself. Nate Oates, what he's doing speaks for itself. Each of those schools has made a Final Four in the last 2 years. But Kansas is in the mix, and it feels like Mark Pope and Kentucky, to their credit, are really making a move on this kid, okay? So he's about 6'5", 6'6". He is a wing. And he actually gave KSR a very interesting quote about his recruitment. Producer Matt was all over it today, so why don't you pop that quote? This was via Kentucky Sports Radio. My buddy Zach Gagon, who does an excellent job covering Kentucky recruiting and basketball. This is what Caleb Holt told Zach Gagon. He said, quote, Coach Pope, he was my on-the-court coach at USA Training Camp. I got to play for him, and it was actually fun. He let me rock out. He was like, that's how it's going to be at Kentucky. Kentucky is definitely in the mix, high up there. I mess with Mark Pope and everything. Listen, I'm a boring old millennial. When the kid says, I mess with so-and-so, that's always a good sign. And I'll say this too, this is a little bit of that Team USA impact. If you remember, we talked about this during training camp. Yes, Mark Pope wasn't an official coach, but there were a few coaches that were allowed to be quote unquote on-court coaches, which is basically means that the early portion of the training camp, Mark Pope, Nate Oates, Hubert Davis were among those who went out and, were part of the workouts and helping him out. And everybody said it, and it was true. If you can have access to the best players in America, that's never a bad thing. And that's exactly what Mark Pope and all those coaches had the opportunity to do. So you talk about the impact that has. I think it's clear with Caleb Holt. It's not a bad thing, and I think it's a good thing. Now, Caleb Holt has officially set up a visit to Kentucky. He will go the first weekend in September, or maybe the second weekend, September 5th through 7th. But why that's noteworthy is because there is an official visit on the docket. We knew he was going to Auburn. We knew he was going to Bama. Listen, we talked about it in the mailbag last week. I know Mark Pope hasn't landed that elite 5-star that isn't from Kentucky. He's gotten Jasper Johnson. He's gotten Malachi Moreno. Didn't get Caleb Wilson last year. Jason Crow Jr. looks like he's going in another direction. I only bring it up to very simply say that this one feels like there's some legs to it. Now, we'll see what happens through the rest of the recruitment. I'm not going to put the cart before the horse, but it's a good sign. I like the quotes. I think it's a good thing for Mark Pope. By the way, one guy that I did not give you the name of, producer Matt, Deron Rippey Jr., kids being recruited, but one of the fastest rising players in America. I only bring it up because he is another guy that Mark Pope seemed to really prioritize this weekend. The quote-unquote issue, if you want to call it that, is that this kid I think he's the Nate Ament of this year from the perspective of he's being recruited by everybody, and he seems to have zero problems taking every visit imaginable. Again, he is a player that is a fast-rising member of the class of 2026, but among the visits that he plans on taking, he will be going to Kentucky in a few weeks. He's also planning on visits to Miami, North Carolina, Alabama, Texas, Syracuse, Indiana, and Tennessee. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 visits that he's got scheduled. I wanted to reference him because obviously, again, Mark Pope, that was another player that Mark Pope prioritized. But it just feels like when you got 8 visits lined up, I don't think we can even begin to speculate on what schools you might be interested in or where you might land. I know North Carolina feels like they're in pretty good shape, but just want to mention his name as well because he is one of the fastest rising recruits in this class. Really quickly, we'll close out on a couple other names, and then we'll get out of here. One, Mika Murinen. So this was a guy, we did an update on him a few weeks ago because there was thought that he might reclassify, but he is from Finland originally, now plays his high school ball in the U.S. It's worth noting on him. Last week, cut his list to 7. Let's see if I can do the 7 off the top of my head. Arkansas, Kentucky, NC State, North Carolina, Michigan, Indiana is 6. I believe Kansas is 7. Let's see if I got that right off. No, Duke is the 7th one. So there you go. Kentucky, Arkansas, Duke, Indiana, Michigan, NC State, UNC. Listen, first of all, there was speculation he might reclassify. I think at this point, it's probably unrealistic to expect that. There's not a spot at Kentucky. There's not a spot at Duke. There's not a spot at Michigan. There's not a spot at UNC. Maybe NC State. I know they lost the Paul Mbaya kid. Maybe they would take him. I don't know. But I think he's going to be in 2026. I only bring it up because the cut is worth noting, especially with the big schools. If I had to make a guess right now, I would actually guess maybe Michigan. He has visited Michigan, Arkansas, and Utah. Utah does not make the final cut. That's kind of noteworthy. I'll go a little inside college hoops again. Utah is coached by Alex Jensen. Alex Jensen is a former teammate at Utah of Hano Metala. Hano Metala is from Finland. Mika Murinen is from Finland. Long story short, if you need a player out of Finland, Hano Metala is the guy to go to. His former teammate at Utah does not make the final 7. Probably not a great sign for them, but Mika Murinen final 7 is out. And lastly, really quickly, because I'm a Husky, just give you the quick Dan Hurley, where was he? I think it's interesting with Dan Hurley, by the way. Just feels like it's been a quiet offseason for him. He's finally out of the spotlight. I think the last 2 years, really, there was just a lot of media appearances, first pitches. I think he's quietly enjoying being in the shadows. Not as many eyeballs on him. Well, I only bring it up because I think the 2 names that seem to be prioritized for him, Cole Clover. By the way, I think somebody in the chat last week when we were doing our mailbag was asking about Cole Clover. Only thing we know right now, 4-star. What's interesting about him, he grew up as an NC State fan, so can NC State get in the mix? Right now, he has visits set up with Florida and Alabama, but it seems as though UConn is trying to get in the fold there. And then the other name, this is one that I am very intrigued by, Abdu Torre. Okay, so I'm really bad with the name, but this is one of the best players maybe to ever come out of the state of Connecticut. High 4-star. He will be a 5-star when it's all said and done. Grew up in Connecticut, plays in West Haven, decided not to take any of the prep school routes. He's playing his senior year in Connecticut. Again, I'm not going to sit here and speculate if UConn is the favorite. Certainly a lot of schools trying to get in the mix with Abdul Traore, Traore, however you say it. I so apologize for my UConn people, for my Connecticut people. I'm screwing this one up. But I just bring it up because to me, UConn has very clearly prioritized him. He plays on the Adidas circuit as well. I'll be curious to see if UConn is out in California watching him this weekend.